Hey, everybody, here's some information about the Roaring Twenties that you might want to write down in your notebook or include on your presentation that you're going to hand in to me today. Okay, today is Wednesday, February 8th. Check this out. Let's kind of review what we know about the Roaring Twenties or what we should know about the Roaring Twenties. The 1920s is a very important era because in the 20s, Americans became quite wealthy and prosperous. We discussed this a little bit already in our classes. The first thing of note that we should consider is that people are moving to the city more than ever before. And we've heard of this word before called urbanization. You can see Chicago has 3 million people, New York has over 5 million people. For the first time during the 20s, more people live in cities than in the rural areas. And this causes a little bit of some culture clashes. Throughout the 1920s, Americans found themselves caught between urban and rural. Urban life was considered to be a little bit more anonymous because there was crowds, there were strangers, there were money makers, there's people that were in the cities looking to have a good time. We call those pleasure seekers. Rural life, on the other hand, was more tied to close personal ties, hard work, strong morals, and it was considered a little bit more safe. Do you think these differences still exist today? Oh, interesting. See, I just pretended like you were talking to me because you can talk to me if you want. Let's go on to the next slide. New technologies. This is kind of an exciting time. Of course, I'm going to focus on Henry Ford first. We all know that he created the assembly line, which made automobiles more affordable for the common American. And his machine was known as the Model T. But another new technology, as far as transportation is concerned, is the airplane. Airplanes were used to send mail, and the very first airplane flights that you could book as a passenger came about during the 1920s in the Pan Am Airway, with the beginning of the Pan Am Airways. Charles Lindbergh is a 25-year-old man from Little Falls, Minnesota, and he's the first one to fly across the Atlantic at this time in 1927. Within 1 year of his flight, air travel grew 4 times. I think this is an interesting graphic to take a look at. On May 12th, 1927, Lindbergh flew from San Diego, California to Long Island, New York, and it took about 22 hours. Today, I think that same flight would take about 4 hours. May 20th, 1927, he flew from Long Island, New York. You can see a map of this to Paris, France. That took him 38 hours. The name of his airplane was the Spirit of St. Louis. I think that you can make that same trip today in under 8 hours. It's kind of fascinating. Of course, you've been learning about refrigerators and toasters and ice makers and all that stuff because we had electrical appliance boom in the Roaring Twenties. These include, like I just said, refrigerators, waffle makers, so on and so forth. But take a look at this little ad that I have here. It says, what is the advertisement telling us about purchases people make? It says, pay or 2 years to pay your Serval electric refrigerator down. 2 years to pay for your Serval electric refrigerator, only $10 down. So that is paying on credit or installments. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Advertisements. The first major advertising scene was during World War I, and it was done through propaganda. We learned all about propaganda already. So now in the 1920s, businesses start to flip the propaganda onto the consumers. Look at this ad, wash away fat in years of age with Lamar reducing soap. There's no soap that makes anybody skinny, folks. For your eyes, brilliance, expression, charm. Maybe it's Maybelline. How's your breath today? For some of you, it stinks, don't you think? Use Listerine. For only $580, you could buy a Ford. Consumerism is at an all-time high in the 1920s. People begin to buy on credit or installment payments. It's when you have an installment at such and such a time. Okay. Um, this is kind of interesting because people don't know what they're getting into at this moment. But you see, look at this ad for buying a car on credit. Uh, it says that 1,147,000 people bought a car from General Motors on credit from the years 1919 to 1925. Another change in American culture media is in media and film when silent movies first come out. So the silent movies start first with the Birth of a Nation is the first movie ever to be made, which is kind of sad because it's a movie about Reconstruction in the South and the rise of the KKK. There's a lot of undertones of racism in that movie. With the rise of movies as entertainment, this creates a rise in the film industry, and LA and Hollywood start to become a quite notable location. There's a video here called Charlie Chaplin, the kid fight scene. You can see who Charlie Chaplin is. He is one of our first Hollywood mega superstars. Maybe you've seen this face before with the little mustache and the weird bowler hat. But I'll post this online so you can check it out on your own accord. Oh, it's going to play a little bit. Ooh, this is not a talkie, it's just a movie. I'll post it on the website. The first ever talkie is a movie where they took the dialogue that was spoken between characters and they recorded that and dubbed it alongside the movie, or they joined it up. So they I guess you would say they were in sync with each other. And so the very first talkie movie is called The Jazz Singer. Here's a little bit. Ooh, fun, huh? I'll post those other videos on Schoology so you can check those out as well. People at home were listening to the radio, and the radio was really perfected in World War One. People could now hear their favorite sports teams play. Sometimes the president would get on the radio and make an announcement to the entire country. That becomes very important during the Great Depression, which is our next piece of information. Notice on this slide, we're talking about paying in installments again. That's another form of credit. Changes in American culture continue with baseball, America's favorite pastime. Um, but one thing that you should notice that baseball was segregated in the 1920s. There was a Negro league that was set up for Black Americans that wanted to play baseball. Most of these teams were in the northern states. Other big heroes of the sports engine at this time were Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb in baseball. Um, College football teams became quite popular at this time. Joe Dempsey was a very popular and famous boxer. You've probably heard of some of those names. School changed as well. I think this is fascinating to think about. The enrollment in high school quadrupled between 1914 and 1926. Before this time, most people thought that high school was optional. Now it's pretty standard throughout the United States that a high school diploma is well worth it. Some states say that you can quit school at age 16. Minnesota has a statute that says you can't leave the classroom until you're 18 years old. Public schools met the challenge of educating millions of immigrants, which was pretty interesting. Take a look at this image. I like to see this classroom, all these people sitting in a row. You know, they don't have a Chromebook, American flag in the back, not a lot of posters on the wall, maybe a couple. Interesting little weird pipe thing. Another part of education that you should have added to your slides was the Scopes monkey trial. In March of 1925, Tennessee passed the nation's first law that made it a crime to teach a theory called evolution. Evolution is the idea that all living organisms come um, from the same genetic beginnings millions and millions of years ago. And over the course of millions of years, people have evolved from ancient relatives that were kind of monkey-like.
Here's what I found.
Oh my gosh, Siri's talking to me. I don't love the name monkey trial, so we'll just call it the Scopes trial. Okay. But the Scopes was a biology teacher who dared to teach his students that man derived from a lower species. And he did that. He was fined 100 and let's see, I have the 100. He was fined $100, which would be equivalent to $1,500 today. And but the verdict was overturned later on. But still to this day, it's quite controversial topic. Ooh, women in the 1920s have a little change as well. Women won the right to vote with the 19th Amendment in 1920. Of course, we already learned about that. Change in fashions equals flappers, which is kind of like a dress that would look like this. Short skirts, short hairdos, and lipstick. Very sensational. Changes continue with women. Women were out at the beach swimming. They started to go to work, and play some sports even. We're not going to watch this prohibition video. Prohibition, we learned a little bit about this already, but in 1917, Congress passed the 18th Amendment that was then ratified in 1919 that made the consumption of alcohol illegal. So that meant that people started to bootleg alcohol. They would make it in their home and then sell it on the black market. There was also these really like hidden locations where you could go and get an illegal beverage. They were called speakeasies. But in 1933, Congress passed the 21st Amendment, which ended prohibition. But I think these are all interesting images. You see these guys these are police officers that have collected a lot of booze. Here's a location inside of a speakeasy where people are drinking. Here's a image of a keg of beer being dumped into the drain. These women here say they have a sign that says, "Lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours." Interesting. Because of prohibition, we saw an increase in gangster activity. These gangsters, they ran bootleg industries and turned a huge profit. Unfortunately, some of these gangs became rivals. We know that this still exists today, and their violent crime erupted. Some of the notable public enemies with very famous last names would include Al Capone. His nickname was Scarface. Bugsy Siegel. Pretty Boy Floyd. Frank Costello was known for his gambling tirades in New York City. So he wasn't much of a guy that was running booze, but more so allowing people to gamble. Machine Gun Kelly, he was in Oklahoma, Kansas, Tennessee, and Texas. John Dillinger, I think that my grandma says that we have some kind of family connection to John Dillinger. Babyface Nelson and Lucky Luciano. I really like the names of these guys. John Dillinger and Babyface Nelson were bank robbers. By the mid 1920s, only 19% of Americans supported prohibition, so it wasn't a very popular law. Many felt prohibition caused more problems than it actually solved, like crime and gangsters, the rise of gangs. The 21st Amendment finally was repealed in 1933, as we already said. You might want to add that to your notes. Okay. Let's talk about the isms. I think that there is some stuff in your slides about the Red Scare, and that's what we're going to talk about now. The isms, capitalism and socialism. Capitalism is the focus on capital, on making money, whereas socialism is a focus on social, on the people, on like the growth of a country as a society. And in Russia in 1917, we saw the growth of communism when the Bolshevik party took over the Romanov family. So in communism, the focus is on the common good. Everyone is equal. Everyone gets paid the same, doctors, teachers, and farmers. Everyone gets the same amount of stuff: shoes, toilet paper, clothes, food. This guy, Mitchell Palmer, was the attorney general in the 1920s. He was appointed by President Woodrow Wilson and responsible for what we call the first Red Scare. Okay. He was afraid that communism would come to the United States and stop the prosperity that people were experiencing in the 1920s. And he created these raids, which were known as the Palmer raids, that would round up Soviet immigrants, deport them, or detain them. These were also called acts of government repression. The ACLU is a group of people. The American Civil Liberties Union was established to provide legal help to some of the people that Palmer had thrown in jail and detained. This was known as the Red Scare, when the idea was that many Americans could be communists and bring this evil form of government to our country. Uh, and it was kind of a little blown out of proportion. Many Americans saw a red agitator behind union organizers in every labor protest. Anti immigration feelings were at an all time high at that point. There's so much more to the Roaring Twenties than what I just shared with you here, but I'm looking at the time of this video and it's getting longer and longer and longer, and I want to not talk anymore about it. Okay. But there was stuff about communism and Harlem Renaissance. We didn't get a chance to go over that. We can talk a little bit about that when I return from Mexico. And it's going to be awesome. Okay. So, anyways, I hope that you get this project done today. And if you need anything, you could ask Mr. Haida. He would certainly help out. Peace out, my friends.